Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody that's physically with us enjoyed lunch. It was definitely fantastic. Welcome to today's Tech Talk. I'm Chris Beeman. I'm part of the Method Global Logic family. I lead our MedTech commercial efforts, and I'm joined here today by two not only good friends, but colleagues that I've worked with at the same company in the past, and also now partnering with in current role here within Method and Global Logic. And I think the topic is, apropos for a lot of what we see going on in the healthcare space of how AI is bringing around and evolutionizing care. But I think, what we'll see today is that I think as you look at the buzzwords we go around, it's not something that's taken form here in the last 18 months. I think there's a lot of accelerations and things like that. So hopefully this will be informative for everybody here and also online. We appreciate you taking the time. We will have time at the end for some Q&A. So definitely feel free to think of questions you might have. But we'll start by introducing the panel that we have here. We'll start with you, Vinay. Vinay Tikka, coming to us from Arthrex, digital leader there with a lot of experience in everything from robotics all the way up to surgical planning, imaging, things like that. So Vinay, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll start the first question before we go to Ben. Start with you, just given your career and the trajectory, where things have gone from machine learning to early fundamentals of AI and now what you see today, and then we'll have Ben introduce himself as well.
Sure. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, thank you. Again, thanks for having me here. That is Kyle and other team members from Methods. So I appreciate you guys having me here. My name is Vinay Tikka, and Chris mentioned I had the privilege to work with him before. My background is computer science. I'm not a biomedical engineer. I did not study medicine. I wish I did, because I made my dad happy, but I did not. But happened to be that I ended up in medicine last 14 years. As a computer scientist, right, you may be wondering what I'm doing in medicine in general. As you look around, there's a lot of planning that happens in any field that you take. And being in orthopedics, right, my background have been very helpful, and I'll tell you what that is. Around 20 years ago, I always liked robotics. I was telling these guys last night. And I happened to be studying automation, robotics, and sensor design as my master's. And I never thought I'll be in medicine at all. Like, I have no exposure or idea about it. Then I was doing some programming on robots and GPS systems, and happened to be in a place where there's a lot of orthopedics. So I got a job there, and I was doing a lot of surgical planning, navigation for helping surgeons treat their patients better through creating personalized plans. This is almost 14 years ago, and we were using AI then, right? But we never called AI, it is something else. But before I answer what you asked, right, I'm going to ask the questions of the crowd here, at least in the room. If I were to ask you guys what AI means, I need some volunteers what AI means to you guys. Like, what do you know about it? What comes to your mind first? Anyone? So, but automation has been for a long time, right? That is not new at all. But something changed in the last few years. Meaning, to your point, they're augmenting our decision making, right, and automating certain things. And that has been happening in the medicine for a long time. I think the difference was now the techniques that we have in the field are much more accessible to normal people. Before, accessible only certain kinds of, right, experts, lack of a better word. I think that's a big change in the field that I see myself.
Thanks, Vinay. Ben's coming to us from AWS, has decades of experience leading large engineering teams in the med device field, everything from infusion pumps to imaging, implantables. So Ben Xavier, one of the principal solutions leads in the healthcare and life science organization at AWS. So tell us a little bit about your career, how you got here, what AI has meant for you over the course of the last few decades, and where you see it heading in the coming years.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, so Chris and I used to work at AWS together, and I have to tell you that I'm still pretty upset at him for leaving me. So, but I appreciate every opportunity to continue to work with Chris here. Yeah, so a little bit about me. I'm Ben Xavier. I'm based out of San Diego, and I've been with AWS for going on almost 6 years now. And my kind of history or record really is about engineering, building medical devices, designing. And it's been a whirlwind and a very exciting time for me in the last few years. In particular, the last kind of couple of years with this explosion of AI. So I've been thinking about that question you were asking a while back ago, like what's the evolution? Where do I see it going? And what's the practical impact on all of us is pretty dramatic. For years and years, for decades, as I and various team members kind of build healthcare solutions and medical devices, it was an immense undertaking. I remember every single time we would get a new device to market, file with the FDA, we would kind of print out this stack of paper of all the design inputs, the design outputs. And over the years, it never got smaller. It just got bigger and taller to the point where now it's hitting the ceiling. And I think about that a lot because what I think AI, and in particular this kind of migration over to agentic-based systems are really doing is recognizing that, oh my God, it takes not just an army, but it takes an immense amount of human compute to manage all that complexity. And for the first time, I'm not terribly afraid of that complexity anymore because we are building these processes and agentic systems that kind of help us manage it so that we can make better decisions. And I think that's kind of a big kind of demarcation is that complexity itself is never going away, but these kind of new forms of agentic systems and AI is not just providing automation, but really allowing us to almost create intelligence as its own principle. A unit test is a principle within software and development. But now even the unit of intelligence, I think we're beginning to kind of shape that and what those unit of intelligence actually are doing for us as we progress.
So as you think about this, Vinay, and you look at in the manufacturing space, in your space at Arthrex, as you're thinking about new tools and solutions, how, obviously there's the impact not only in the clinical setting and what you're looking to do, but how do you see this impacting your day-to-day from an R&D perspective? And how is your team applying, agentic models and frameworks, generative AI, however the case might be? And what are some of the challenges that you see, both not only from a technology perspective, but from organizational? What are the things that you guys are thinking through that maybe, that challenge how you've done ways of working and building things over the last, couple decades, and how has that, accelerated in the last couple of years?
Yeah. That's a very broad question, right? I'll give you my framework I follow myself. Every time you try to bring AI or any machine learning into a mix, people try to jump to use that model right away, right? Because that's a normal behavior. But take a process. It takes 10 steps to get from 1 to 10. You can't apply a same lens from 1 to 10 because for you to apply any automation or any learning, you have some kind of information to build that knowledge base on it. But one of the common mistake I see is you have to first standardize, right? Meaning you have to have a standard process, then you have to digitize it. Then you can collect data on it, then you can automate or you can personalize afterwards. But people try to automate or personalize it or apply models at step 4 when you don't have the 1, 2, 3 done yet. If you take a process that has 10 steps, you may have one process very mature, one of them are not mature at all. So that's why most of the time what you see happen is you try to apply the entire learning on all 10 steps when you don't have enough maturity in all other steps. So you have to take a step back and say, where should I first standardize? Where should I digitalize, right? Then you can think about automating and personalizing it. And that is true for medical healthcare as well. For us, we work with surgeons very closely. Of course, if they want to say, I want to automate all of this or personalize this, then we have to take a step back and say, okay, I can personalize step one, but I can't do this step two, right? When I say personal, I'm talking about using machine learning models to help them. And then we can step back and say, okay, where we are in this maturity curve and start applying that maturity, that knowledge there and start building on top of it.
So a follow-up to that is, historically, as you're building models, right, to use in applications and things like that, you're looking for a certain robust amount of data to train those models. Yeah. And how has the ability to do things like create synthetic data today, how has that accelerated that sort of model development? And how has that impacted the sort of accuracy and efficacy of those models that you would use potentially in a clinical setting?
Yeah, I mean, that again depends on the data source as well, right? For example, if you have structured data, it's not bad at all, but we work in a lot of medical imaging, like X-rays, CTs and stuff. And I mean, if you go back 3 years ago, there is no way to synthesize the data or synthetically create the data. But now there's some models, but even then you have to somehow validate those models to create synthetic data. But as regulatory bodies are getting up to speed, they're help us to accept that data as a source of data and helping us. But it all depends on the use case, right? It all comes down to, I mean, you're working on creating digital CT machines just because you can create synthetic data, but someone has to validate that CT model to use in clinical applications.
And Ben, sitting where you sit, right, it's sort of the forefront and sort of in the circle, right, in the center of the sun, and where the strategy at AWS is not necessarily betting on any one particular model, but being the infrastructure that would support model development and exploration across a broad set. So you have that lens, but then you also have the lens of having interacted with regulatory bodies over the course of your career. And how do you see those regulatory bodies utilizing AI to also advance some of their decision making?
That's a great question. I recently was presenting to a large body of regulatory affairs folks around the world, and it's amazing to think, as they were kind of thinking through what the future looks like for their work, the biggest question that came up was, well, what is the regulators doing? What are they doing? And at AWS, we help, of course, all the major regulators. We participate in all the big initiatives around agentic AIs and medtech. And the regulators are absolutely leveraging agentic systems and AI to assess and help guide the quality of all the regulatory filings as well. So they themselves are leveraging the technology and going through that discovery process. And one of the interesting questions were, well, if they're using AI and they could potentially find gaps in risk related areas or things that are not quite lined up, then how are we ourselves leveraging AI to kind of preempt that? How do we discover that for ourselves? And so absolutely, I think everybody is really experimenting at this stage and still doing a great deal of discovery work, but the value prop is pretty large, or at least the promise of it, and it's showing up. So I think, I think any medtech company analyzing and leveraging AI to kind of produce work output is one thing, but a big part of that is leveraging the AI to define these quality attributes that help determine the output is good, bad, or ugly. And what are those gaps so they can address it before it ever hits the regulators. So that's a pretty big step, I think, for a lot of the med techs to kind of consume and understand what that looks like and how to actually build those type of systems.
And a follow-up to that is, how are regulators, but also how are the it's not even just med tech, but you look at, there's a lot of software first, AI first companies, right? I think you mentioned earlier in a conversation in the last year, there's been what, 3,000 AI enabled products that have been cleared, by the FDA alone, right?
Yep.
So how are they de-risking those, the products and the use of large language models and other AI, tool sets that traditionally, you would manage maybe through a soup or a COTS, which is, for those that don't know, software of unknown provenance or commercial off-the-shelf software. So what's different now for organizations as they go through that validation, and how do they de-risk that, and how does regulators accept that risk tolerance?
So a little point of clarification. So there absolutely has been a large acceleration of AI-powered devices that are being approved by the FDA and other regulators. So there's like a 2 or 3x fold increase. It's quite dramatic. Whether they actually use large language models or other foundation models to actually derive some of their intended uses, that's still an open question. So it might be more classic AI. But either way, at the end of the day, the way I think about it is that in a world of kind of undeterminism, AI is really there to help us to become more deterministic. So anything that we do from my risk management perspective of building these AI-powered solutions, it's really about managing the realm of possibility to scope it all down, to make it more deterministic. And so there's a lot that you could do, of course, as we progress more and more towards foundation models to manage all that risk. One of them, like just to throw out some examples, obviously a good one is certainly to use retrieval augmented generation to kind of source your data. So RAG is very typically used today, but then you can layer that further, like a lot of risk controls. We layer our risk controls to help reduce that area of probability. So adding additional adversarial AI where the output itself is actually done by a separate model, kind of like, in airplanes, you typically have redundant systems. System A and System B does something, and then we make a decision on that. So a lot of these systems are layering these redundancies on top of those AI. So you may have one model doing something, and then another model that's specifically designed to double check. And actually, a lot of the improvements in the commercial large language models from the big providers, that's what they're doing. They're layering further agentic systems on top of that output to increase the quality of that output. So that's what you really want to do, is layer in all these different approaches. And so I think from a regulated perspective, they're going to be very hyper-focused on seeing those state-of-the-art risk controls embedded in your systems. How are you reducing the overall determinism or increasing determinism in the outputs? And then what do you do to actually, safeguard when it goes out of bounds? And so long as you cover those particular areas, you can get a reasonable output, then obviously safe and effective output, you'll get through the regulators for sure.
So Vinay, from your perspective, working with surgeons, and you guys are interacting with them basically daily. And I think if you were to ask a surgeon about artificial intelligence or anything, they would probably give you a bunch of different answers. But at the end of the day, what is it that the end user, do you think, that they're looking for? Like, how are they looking for, and it's not even just AI, but like, how are they're used to so many years of guiding themselves through a surgery based on their own knowledge base, leveraging the hardware that you guys create, and you're thinking surgical devices, implants, sutures, anchors, whatever. How are they actually even thinking about software? Is it helpful to them? Much less like intelligent software, right? And what are their expectations?
Sure. So before I answer the question, we joked about last night. I've been in this field for long enough, right, to know that if you go 10 years back, right, AI was used or machine learning, deep learning was used, but nobody made claims about it because it's a regulatory hurdle. They tried to avoid saying machine learning in their applications because now you have to show extra rigor on it. Now the coin just flipped and everybody wants to say AI because all the marketing that comes with it, and also regulatory bodies are open to it. So I'll answer your question now, Chris. At Arthrex, right, I think it's a private company, so we've put a lot of emphasis on medical education and training, just not surgeons, but also patients and the surgical staff too. Traditionally, if you look at any AI as a whole umbrella, you have machine learning, deep learning, right? You have LLMs that come now. Machine learning has been used, or deep learning has been used in a lot of ways. But where LLMs are making a big splash is, as a surgeon, right? A good example is this. They may see 1,000 patients a year, a good surgeon. And some of them will remember all the patients because of who they are. Some of them will not, right? But what they want is they want some kind of information at the fingertip saying, I saw the patient like this maybe 6 months ago. I want to know what I did to that patient so that I can do the same thing for the newer patient. Right? But as LLM, right, you're helping a surgeon with information, but you're not executing the procedure for them, meaning that is no different than scalpel for them, right? Because or hammer, it's the same thing. They need a tool for them to do the procedure, but the tool has to be safe and effective. Same with the digital tool too. So end of the day for them, they don't care. Something will come tomorrow, but they want a tool that they can rely on and make them a better surgeon. Now, other thing is, not all of them are good surgeons, right? Some of them are top in their field, some of them are not. Our goal is to create tools that you can make a mediocre surgeon a better surgeon. That's what our tools are. So that's where we apply the same tools to give them those powers.
And maybe a follow-up to that is, going further into the journey, what do you think the patient expectations are, and what are they coming and asking for? And because I think we've probably all have seen where digital can be a huge marketing advantage for certain companies that are out there and generating that sort of demand. So what's the expectation from the patient?
So, I mean, that's a great question because before I said AI was never used as front and center, but what's happening is as the market in general is taking this cues from other industries, patients are getting educated too. That happens in robotics, right? Someone that knows robotics enough that if you look at any robotics that use in orthopedics today, they're no different than a robotic system that you see in a manufacturing line. That's all they are, right? The software that drives it. But from patient's perspective, they feel like the robot is doing the procedure when it is not. It's just helping them in some aspect of it. And same is happening on the digital tools as well, right? Meaning patients are educated enough just because of what our trends happen in the market. They're asking the surgeons, are using any advanced technologies? If you say no, then they're going to go to somebody that uses advanced technologies. Now, you as a surgeon has to think about not only how good you are, how well you can market your skills with the technology itself. So that's a primary driver too. And the challenge will be at the reimbursement models. Someone has to pay for it. These tools are not cheap. So that's where I think you will see a lot of stuff happening in the marketplace where someone has to pay for them or augment them or bundle them with your hardware. That's the only way to do it.
So Ben, given where AWS is sitting, and you guys have an opportunity to see how that influences behavior across the entire value chain, and so what are the things that AWS is thinking about that would then influence how adoption happens not only at the clinical, but, the patient setting, also payer and provider?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that like when you think about where we invest pretty heavily, obviously we invest a great deal on the builder space, right? We provide a lot of the Lego pieces that a lot of the best medtech organizations build upon. But more and more, as you see the technology frameworks and the stacks, things are becoming more and more specialized, where we're moving up that value chain. Because what's really happening nowadays is like what's considered like a building block has not evolved further and further. It used to be like, oh, we'll build for storage. And now we're building actually specifically for imaging, right? For PAC systems and the like. or we're building for just data sets, object-related data sets with Amazon S3. But now that's evolving further up the stack into, oh, we should actually create agentic layers on top of that object store so that anybody can search data sets in a semantic way. It used to be you had to build like these very complex databases and whatnot that sits on top of that data to understand the metadata, the what is it, describing the data and the like. But as we progress further and further up this stack, these systems are becoming more and more intelligent, where it knows semantically this data actually is related to this data is actually related to that. So when you do a kind of a search, it finds the data that's relevant to you. So that value chain is just continuing to move up. And I think to kind of how that impacts like the realm of possibility for both clinicians and patients is as your building blocks become higher and higher up that value chain stack, the cost burden of building medtech solution dramatically drops. Something that used to take immense organization to do, now, well, these Lego pieces exist for us. We can actually build on top of that. And now these higher forms of patient engagement, of actually providing patient-related tools so they themselves can be part of that decision-making as they should be. So patients are becoming more engaged, patients are becoming more knowledgeable in the questions they ask. All of this is because the building blocks are becoming higher and up that abstraction layer and making it far more accessible for everyone, in medtech, patients, clinicians, and of course, the builders.
So that's really interesting. And as you think of the stack going up, right? I think it's going to naturally lead into this question for you, Vinay. How does this impact the experience, right? And I think we're sitting in an office where probably the vast majority of the folks here are thinking experience first, right? And how that impacts your product, not only product design but the strategy, how you're getting that product into market. So it impacts the entirety of the experience. And so from that, how do you see AI-enabled tools impacting the overall experience, and what is the expectation on that?
Yeah, I mean, in general, that's a challenge, right? Because I'm one that doesn't like UI at all. That's not my thing. I write algorithms. Models is what I come from. And I never enjoyed any of the UI stuff because I don't have an interest drive for it, right? But what I learned in my career is all my work is useless if someone doesn't make it meaningful to somebody else, right? That's all it is. So to answer your question, I learned very quickly that I can write the most fancy model, but if it is not presented to somebody else in a meaningful way, it's not useful at all. And especially in our world, that's very critical because surgeons don't want to spend, especially in a environment like US where it's volume-based right work, where very few surgeons spend a lot of time in planning the cases. They want to be right there. They want to have a quick insight of information and they want to move on. So if you're providing too much information for them, it's just cognitive overload for them. They don't have time for it as well. So you have to somehow create an environment for them where we provide information to them and they can make some quick decisions. And that's an important factor. And I think with FDA's regulation around usability and all those things, that's becoming much more important now. And I think we emphasize quite a bit on that. But Chris, that's a billion-dollar question, right? There's no easy answer to it.
Well, I think the follow-up is, how is that impacted the way that you guys think about new products that you're developing, and how you're bringing those to market to the surgeons, and what impact that's had? Like, how do you guys, how are you thinking of that experience first, and then bringing in the data to support the experience, or the vice versa? Yeah,
I can talk about your engagement with us right now, right? We have a very good design standards we follow because we want to have a consistent experience across all our digital applications that are either intraoperative, pre-op, or post-op. When we engage with Global Logic and Method, right, you guys talk to the surgeons and we got a lot of insights from them. But at the same time, we want to take those insights and make it Arthrex standards. And that's where some work went behind the scenes to make sure The surgeons get a consistent experience because someone's doing a hip procedure can also do a knee as well, right? What we don't want is to have them two different experiences because then you take away that unified Arthrex brand around it. So even though it takes some time in the beginning to standardize it, we have enough tools by now. I think, in fact, our team uses a lot of AI to create those visuals and stuff and do a lot of prototyping. And we put in front of surgeons and they give us feedback. And that is helping us long term. And I think that's one reason they come to us. In fact, we have a name in the industry for being very, they call Arthrex the apple of orthopedics. There's a name, reason for it because we take a lot of pride in creating a lot of good user experiences.
So Ben, thinking about that, and I think we had the conversation, and I think you brought it up last night, and thinking about what tools how you go around your tool selection and how that impacts the different experience that you have, depending on the persona. So, being at AWS, having a variety of tools that are being hosted within the infrastructure, how do you think companies should be evaluating the different tools from a different persona level?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. First off, we should probably be a bit clear, like tools in general, because tools, I think the notion of tools itself is actually changing in this agentic world. It used to be like we would do this decision point, buy versus build, for example. You start analyzing, hey, is this core to my business? Do I need to build something? Or do I need to buy something and then do all the extra work of integrating into our pipelines? I think that itself has to be thought up a little bit differently now, because this revolution of agentic systems and coding agents like Amazon Kiro and the like is giving us maybe a different way of framing that question. Is that building now is kind of like buying, where the experience itself is that, hey, I could find something, I can leverage it, then integrate it. But what happens if building it and buying it, the cost curve and the maintenance is about the same? So now you have a different kind of question to ask. So you have a third option, is that it's a hybrid. It's like almost like I'm building something, but I'm building it very specifically. When you buy a tool, they typically are very generalized. They solve a lot of problems, but sometimes your problem domain is very specific. So what happens when that tool could be made? So I think that's a kind of a point of perspective, is that I think people in the meta community should be asking questions about. And then in terms of the personas, I think that it's quite natural for us to think of like, okay, as a program manager, I need to, really manage the workflow, the requirements building, manage the outputs, all of that, inputs to outputs. But in a world where even that role becomes a little bit different, what would that look like? What does the role or persona itself change in this new world? And maybe I'll try to give an example. When a lot of it is like managing the vectors of a program, all these complex vectors between software, hardware development, design, and you're kind of managing all the vectors to try to make sure that they're all pipelined so that they can run pretty well and one feeds another. But what happens when that whole process becomes kind of, I wouldn't say automated. I even have some issues with the term automated nowadays. But in a way, it helps where the agentic systems are being built up to help manage a lot of that complexity and help us make better decision points along the way. When that value starts to be captured by the tool sets that we're building, because of the role that I play in that respect, how does my role actually change in this? I think that is something that we help customers kind of figure out along the way, because you see in medtech all these different relationships. So what happens when the program manager is, thinking through these problems where a lot of the tools are now doing a big portion of that? What's that next level up that they're able to actually do and ask better questions or figure out even better answers to? I think that's really where roles itself is starting to change over time. So I think that contextually, I'll give you an example. A program manager may, for example, start with user needs or talking to customers about what it is that they're doing, and they may leverage technology to actually model that out and present the model output back to the engineering teams versus going through back to engineering, say, hey, please interpret all my notes, figure out, model it, prototype it, so forth. What happens when the workflow now can be fed into an agentic system at a program manager level where now I'm describing it at a much more detailed, higher level? That's a pretty dramatic shift, I think, in the role that we play leading programs and leading projects. So it's a long-winded answer to say that I think that these tool sets are, here to help us grow and challenge us to kind of think a little bit differently about our roles and how these tools are actually could be leveraged to kind of, take us to that next level up.
Can I add a quick comment?
Yeah,
you asked about user experience, right? I think came to realization at some point that we can't build all the solutions ourselves because the market is going so fast. And we're also not in the business of building technologies for everybody. And our main philosophy is owning the experience. That's what we want to own, meaning what our end users see. That's all they care, right? They don't care if you buy or build whatever we do. But our philosophy is to have that constant experience for them across the board. But some we build, some we borrow, some we buy. It all depends on where the product is in the market space. But I think speed is the key, right? Because sometimes building can take longer. But I'm hoping that with the way that the agentic AI is going, we may be able to build some stuff faster than before. But still, we just want the experience, and everything comes after that.
One thing you just triggered a thought there, Vinay, is that also when we think about tools, we think of them as very long-lived. We're making a big decision about something, but what happens when it becomes ephemeral, where it's really just, it may have a very short life? Yeah. Because if the unit costs of building and acquiring tools to do a bit of work, when that cost collapses, these tools can actually be transitory.
Right.
That's another different, huge undertaking where it can really transform our ability to innovate and try things out. I think that is a good kind of point in your thinking there.
So I'm going to throw both of you a little bit of a curveball. So we've talked a lot about how organizations, manufacturers, medical device manufacturers, how they're leveraging AI to build tools, how that in solutions that offer decision support to clinicians, impact the patient. How about and this will maybe I'll start with you, Ben, and then go to Vinay. But now we have basically jumped the curve, right? And now you have at the patient fingertips, and we talked about this, going from data, to information to knowledge, right? And you have things like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or any of these tools, and now you can see patients have a whole lot more control and a whole lot more insight into whatever their medical journey is. And so how do you see that impacting the industry, and how do you see patients taking that sort of control? And those are non-traditional tools that are outside of your typical health tech, med tech, pharmaceutical companion side of things. How do you see that changing the landscape?
Oh, it's already changing the landscape pretty dramatically. By the way, Chris and I were talking about this model. It's called the DIKW model, DIKW or DIKW model. So you have, it's really a pyramid where you have data, which is the unit of everything. And then you have information, which starts to coagulate and form into categories and groupings. And then you have knowledge, the ability to take that information and do something meaningful with it, the how to. And then you have the highest form, which is wisdom. And wisdom is really why do, why ask, why this, why that. It's fundamentally about the wisdom. And so when we think about that kind of framework of that model, agentic AI systems, as it relates to patients, is that we're becoming where the commoditization of data, knowledge, and information in such a way that we have so much access to it. That's actually something that regular folks can consume. And you can get a crash course in anything nowadays. So then the question is, why should I do this? What's the implication? So you can make far better decisions for yourself, for your family. And the implications is pretty large. Then the expectation of us as builders of medtech solutions, of healthcare providers, is far more, because the questions that are being asked is so much more informed. The implications is so much bigger. So I think that is pretty dramatic for it. And on the development side, like for medtechs to kind of see this model where patients are more informed and whatnot, this has always been, frankly, a goal of medtech, is to connect ecosystems together. I think you and I were talking about this. You have an infusion system alarming. You have the bed, which itself is a smart device. You have so many of these systems, alarm management systems, all this stuff, but they really haven't really talked well together for generations now. And I've been thinking about that. It's very easy to say that, oh, it's because, the incentive structures aren't there. No, the incentive structures have always been there to connect these systems together. The value has already been understood. But to deal with the complexity, the fundamental noisiness of that data set, and to deal with intelligent, what should I do in this context or this context? There's millions of variations. So I think the promise is that as we put more, I would say, intelligent semantic layers in front of our devices. So you have the devices themselves, and then you have this semantic layer that describes the context, the meaning of what's coming in and out of the devices, that now these higher form systems we could put that intelligence layer now, and that's what we're seeing, to help make some of that decisions, filter out the noise. And I think a natural progression is what happens when the agent becomes, or these devices within a system becomes a node in the intelligence layer that's surrounding it. That might be what was missing over the last, 40 years, that smart devices and connectivity has always been a push.
So I'm going to ask two questions to folks in the room, right? Choose to answer them. I don't want any PHI, but if you want to raise your hand, please let me know. Anybody had any surgery recently, like sports medicine or joint replacement? Hopefully not, but if there's anybody, there's one. Yeah. Chris, maybe to you. Do you know what implant you got in your body?
I didn't get an implant, but there's hardware in my body that would, in the shoulder and reconstructing the labrum.
So do you know what brand it is?
I do not.
See, that is common, right? Most people don't know what implant they have. That is very common thing, because you go to a surgeon or a clinician for a specific thing. You trust them, right, to make the best choice for you. That is true for most of us, because we just don't know what they do, right? But I think what's changing is how many people wear Oura Ring or any wearables, Apple Watch, right? All of us in some shape or form. You constantly check, right? You check that because it's right in your fingertip. There is something that you can track. So what's happening is we're seeing a conversion of these two things colliding here at some point, meaning between your wellness versus your clinical thing. So to your question, I think we're going to have a generation of patients that are coming out that are tracking everything. So what they want is they want track that side of the business as well, meaning what the surgeons are doing, and they will demand it to say we want to know what you're doing from clinician side, and that's when some of these things will have big impact. I think we're not there yet, but that's what I see changing as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to this as well. The reason why I asked this is, I look at it. So for those of you that might know, so my son's, he's just turned 8, had to have a liver transplant at 6 months old, and so chronic disease that you manage over the course of time. And I would say in the last 18 months, the level of decision making at our fingertips that my wife, who is far more active in the management of his care, would have because of the Gen AI tools at her fingertips is really so what she would say, and what I've experienced with her, is that the contextualization of his journey, and how we can monitor symptoms and changes, and then quickly get a sanity check through an AI tool, and then follow that up very quickly with clinicians to get their insights from the trusted care, I think is what is really rapidly enhancing. I mean, we're just at the fingertips, but I mean, if you take a look and you want to look, and so it's almost like having a personalized, contextualized EHR. Like even the EHRs can't keep up with all of this, because you can now input things like lab results and things like that, and you're already getting early understanding of what you have at your fingertips in a manner that his transplant team would now say that we're asking questions in a manner that they hadn't seen in the last 5 years, and they were now considering things for managing his care that they otherwise wouldn't have had, because of you're going from a limited data set of their experience as clinicians for all of the patients that they've treated, to now having access to thousands, if not millions, of data points, right? And so I think that's what's like really starting to accelerate not only the adoption curve, but just where innovation is headed. But
oh my gosh, that was actually the point I was trying to make, is this beautiful statement you've made, is that if you think about it, clinicians have to deal in the aggregate. So a lot of the decision making that they go through, that whole process, is the generalized population, the assessment of things and making quick decisions. What you just said is that now we're empowered to help us personalize. Because your family, what's going on. You could take all these inputs, cross-reference it with data sets using agentic systems and the like. So it's always this push towards personalization, which is the right approach. But the cost curve and the ability to do so must collapse. And I think you just demonstrated that incredibly well, is that you've helped personalize the care because you're informed. You can ask the right questions. You know what to ask. So that's a very powerful statement. I think that's absolutely going to continue the impact both between care providers and patients.
Yeah. So I think we have about 10 minutes left. Would love to open up to questions.
Hey there, Gavin Phillips. I get to work with Ben. I used to work with Chris at AWS. I think you guys mentioned, some of the AI ML medical device solutions that have been FDA cleared over the last 3 to 4 years. I want to say it's on the order of 900 plus, right? And what's interesting is when you look at those, I want to say roughly 70% or more are all radiology, all imaging based, right? And that makes a lot of sense because you can very clearly build a value proposition around time spent for a radiologist. You can use AI and imaging tools to scan through thousands of images and flag images that don't seem to fit appropriately, right? And And so I think that was a natural area where we've seen a lot of customers within the healthcare and life sciences space innovating. I'm kind of curious on each of your perspectives, and I don't think there's a right answer here, but where do you think the next frontier is outside of imaging for using generative AI and agentic systems to really influence care?
I could maybe take a stab at that. From a trend line, I think for me, I'm seeing a great deal in clinician or clinical decision support as being the critical piece of the puzzle. I mean, when you think through like all the stages of data collection and so forth, clinical decision support just means, if you think about what a clinician has to do, they have to understand all the various inputs at this particular stage of the care and so forth, create a care plan, and deal with all the variations as they come up and all that data. So it takes just an immense amount of time and energy to assert that you're getting the right data. So clinical decision support software takes all that context data, goes to the standard of care, all the various ways in which to address, takes all that input and presents back to the clinician, hey, here's option A, B, and C, and here's the reason and the rationale and why I'm making this recommendation. And then now it's just the clinicians, the doctors and the care team could say, that's right, that's wrong. And they can quickly do that with the right information. And if they need a cross-reference, they just click and jump to the source data of that standard of care. So that collapses the time and energy, yes, but fundamentally it's improving the standard of care, improving us over time. And that of course creates a feedback loop that now we're utilizing these systems, and they themselves, that data then can be fed back into the various models. Like, hey, the clinician actually chose, instead of A, B, and C, they chose D, which wasn't even on your list. This is the care plan that we developed. That missing data then can get fed back into the system and of course improve. So I think clinical decision support software is a big deal. I think that particularly the US has led the way in regulatory updates to kind of demystify and give a little bit of a framework of how to evolve clinical decision support software. I think the other regulators around the world are still kind of catching up, and I think US is definitely leading in this space.
I'm going to give more of a technical answer to your question. Right? AI, right, if you go to classic symbolic AI, right, Stanford had a program, I think in 70s or 80s, that did a rule-based diagnosis. They rolled it out. It worked very well, but it failed very quickly because the rules got bigger. It became unmanageable. Right? They said, we can't do this anymore. Then as time evolved, that second AI went, right? That's when AI died. Then deep learning came. That changed everything, right? With deep learning, what happened was, for any of these models, right, you'd have large data set. Guess what? Since the beginning of time when X-ray started, we are collecting all this images, right? That has been there quite a bit. And that imaging is standard of care for a long time, whether MRI, CT. When deep learning came, the first place to look at is where you have a lot of data. That's medical imaging. And you put a bunch of annotators to annotate the image, and then you start building models. Now where we are is that's when you train the models, annotate them. With zero-shot learning, one-shot learning, or few-shot learning, I don't even annotate anymore because of basic stuff, right? So what I'm saying is through time, where the technology is going, you'll be able to figure out anatomies on the fly, at least from medical imaging side. That's more from unstructured, right? From a structured data, you have EHRs for last 10 years now, thanks to, right, I think ACA Act, where EHRs are standardized now. So you'll see something similar happening there. I think Epic has a big role to play in there compared to other EHRs, but same thing happened there as well. So I think it all comes down to what data we have and how we're going to use them for creating models.
I think also, I'll go to the personalized care and the diagnostics, right? I think the diagnostic space is definitely ripe for the next frontier, because you're able to take in the health history of a particular patient, take in the data from the diagnostics and especially now you look at recently, Truvian just got, cleared for a 510K. And basically, I think they can do up to 70 panels with a prick. And so, giving very personalized sort of insights into that, but then being able to draw in those insights across the general, population health. I think, again, it'll go from just being your chronic, disease, but just general health and wellness. And you're going to start to see, the impact there. I think that's definitely a part of the next frontier.
I like the acknowledgement of there's already so many smart devices inside any standard hospital room. They just don't really talk to one another, and therefore you can't unlock the value from that. And the kind of agentic community-based communication layer between that makes a lot of sense. Kind of a two-part question. Who will create that opportunity, and who should create that as an opportunity?
I can't call out names. So, well, I would say that we're still pretty early in that process. The reason being is that there's a regulatory hurdle to be had potentially, but it's happening. First you do it for yourself as a medtech organization, manufacturer. You build agentic systems of your devices, of your systems. So now you're abstracting away higher forms of care and intelligence, right? And you really want to start there. But I will say that everybody should. And the thing is that, we've been building, every organization's been focused on best in class, right? I'm going to build the best device, patient monitoring. I'm going to build the best infusion pump. I'm going to build the best XYZ device. But the reality is we need best in class systems. We need best in class hospitals. We need best in class, care in the abstract, in the large. Whether it's payer provider systems integrating to devices, that's really what we really want. So how do you do that realistically? In the past, it's been by brute force. We're going to develop a protocol. Let's standardize an HL7 to standardize. The reality is that though we've made incremental progress, it hasn't really reached that level of interconnectivity that we want. When you start putting agentic systems in front, now that layer is not static. The intelligence layer can now interpret and understand the capabilities of these systems and put together plans and help us generate the plan so that we can actually do better care because of it. So I think everybody should. We'll see. But we're still pretty early in that process, to be fair, to be realistic. But we're starting with the back end systems, the things that you don't see, whether it's hospital systems, leveraging AI for interconnecting of those systems and answering big questions and whatnot to improving their dynamic of the hospital. That's actually happening. But for the actual devices, I would say it's still pretty early.
I'll have a different answer. End of the day, it's all incentive driven, right? Someone has to pay for it. That's what it really comes down to. I mean, everybody wants to do these things, but who's going to pay for it? So as a medical device company, right, I'll give an real world example. If you take orthopedics, it used to be pay-per service, right? You get paid for whatever you got used. Then they went to a bundle payment system where I'll pay X amount of money for this, right? Then people found ways to work around it too. Now there's new program coming, right? End of the day, even if a non-profit hospital, they still have to make money. And someone has to create the systems that will create these incentives for them to bring them together. Till we create that fixed incentive model, all the systems will never talk to each other because there's some kind of work has done, right, by different groups of people. Unless government subsidize it to do it, even then, I don't think. But who should do it? Everybody should do it, but nobody will do it till there's incentive way of doing it.
Can I challenge that a little, at least in thought? I 100% agree. Everything is fundamentally based off incentives. Yeah. But the other part of that equation is the cost curve, the unit cost. So when the unit cost begins to asymptotically go to very low numbers, the ability to try and innovate in the system obviously collapses. There's still the regulatory costs, there's still the maintenance costs, understandably, but if your effective cost goes lower, our ability to try things explodes. And I think that's where the big positive message is that we're in an incredible time of discovery and innovation that we can effectively try. I remember talking to you about this, about what happens when we design something and we do all this work to design to execute a pathway forward, but what happens if we could do the 100 designs concurrently, 1,000 designs concurrently, and get to the point where we're actually even seeing the end result, the prototyping, particularly in the digital space? What happens when you can actually try out 100 different paths concurrently? So I have a lot of hope that the incentive structures will align. I think they will quite naturally because we want to see this level of care improvement. But you're right about the paying system. That's above my pay grade to fully understand. But I think that's a part of that equation is the unit cost is collapsing.
Well, I think this has been a great conversation. I know we could probably continue to go on for hours, and I think we're up against time, but I really want to thank both of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us here. Hopefully everybody in the room and online found it to be a worthwhile conversation, and really appreciate you guys taking your time. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Yeah, thank you.